Now, just a brief introduction of the main author of the event. The well-known faculty member, Professor Mufti Mudasir Department of English, with a teaching experience spanning over 20 years. Professor Mudasir is a well-versed in a number of languages such as Urdu, Persian, Arabic, Kashmiri. He has a rare distinction of bringing richness and variety to the teaching of English due to this linguistic versatility. Professor Mudasir's varied interests have led him to contribute in several areas like literary theory and criticism, postmodern studies, Persian and Kashmiri literatures, Kashmiri history and Islamic studies. He has translated poetry from Kashmiri, Urdu, Persian and Arabic, and also taught literatures of these languages in translation. I would like to request Professor Mudasir just to give a brief glimpse of his literary work that he has produced. Then we'll formally hear him later on in a full session. Over to Professor Mudasir sir.
Thank you, Imran Saab, for the kind introduction. Respected Chief Guest Professor Ijaz Sheikh, Guest of Honor Shaukat Sharif Saab, Imran Saab, and my colleagues, my teacher, Professor Hamida, and colleagues from other departments, students, scholars. It's a privilege to be standing here and to be talking about my book, Yusuf's Fragrance, Poems of Mahmud Gami. And I'm very thankful to Dr. Fayaz Noor, librarian in Allama Iqbal Library, who gave me this opportunity to come here and to say something about my book. Now, there's a lot that can be said about the book, the poet, and the act of translation itself. But since we don't have that much time, so I will just say a few things which I think are most important. The first thing that I want to talk about is that why did I choose Mahmud Gami among so many poets of Kashmir who have written in Kashmir? Why Mahmud Gami? I myself did not know Mahmud Gami till 2015. I had just heard about him but not really read him. In 2015 there was a workshop, a literary organization, a very well-known literary organization of India called Sangam House. They had a workshop of Kashmiri poetry. They translated, and we had just some 10 days. There were some other people also. And in those 10 days, 5 of them were in Srinagar, and for 5 days they took us to Pahalgam. I thought there would be some going around, but they just locked us in the room and said that you have to translate. And it is during that workshop that I discovered Mahmud Gami. And when I read Gami, I not only discovered that he was a very prolific writer, in fact perhaps the most prolific writer of his age, but also a pioneer in many respects. Then I thought that it could be taken up further. I was given a select. I did not even have the choice because they had decided. They had consulted some scholars of Kashmiri literature like Teng Saab, like Shok Saab, and some other scholars, and they had given them the selections from different poets, from Lalit to 20th century, Mahjur and Azad. So they gave me a number of poets and a few Sufi poets like Wahab Khar, couple of Nazms of Wahab Khar, and some selections from Mahmud Gami. So one of the selections of Mahmud Gami was from Yusuf Zulaikha, his very famous Masnavi, and some other shorter poems as well. So then somehow, to cut a long story short, I thought that Mahmud Gami would be a good poet to work on, and I started translating him. In the meanwhile, I got a project from ICPR, a major translation project on Mahmud Gami. So I worked on it, and it had to be done. It took longer than I had thought, because although I had done a lot of translation from Persian to English, but I have not really translated Kashmiri. I thought Kashmiri is my native tongue, it won't be that difficult. But to be honest, at times I thought that Kashmiri is more difficult than Persian because many things that we take for granted, many words which we don't know because they are not used so often now as they were 100 years back or 200 years back. And so this process started. I started translating. And when I had done a substantial portion, I thought that this is now taking shape and it can be published. I had already published my first book with Penguin in the very prestigious imprint called Penguin Classics, which I think you know is the most prestigious imprint of Penguin. So I talked to them, I contacted them. They of course said that it has to go through the process, that process they have, of evaluation and all that. So I sent a sample, I sent a piece, an introductory piece, and they liked it. And once they like it, they offer you they're ready to publish the book. But then it takes long because it is a traditional publishing house which has a lot of work throughout their reach is international, so we have to wait. Anyway, I had no problem in waiting. I waited, and this waiting period actually gave me time to work further on translations, to polish my translations. Because as Aga Shai says, the rooms are never finished. I use the same for translations; they are never finished. You can go on, polishing your same translation and reworking on it and trying to improve it. Ultimately, the book came out in 2022, December 2022, and I'm very thankful to God and to all my well-wishers that this was the second Penguin Classic that I had written. And the book is titled Yusuf's Fragrance. Now, after this was done, translation was not the only thing that is required for a Penguin Classic. You need to have a very comprehensive introduction. So I had to write introduction. In that introduction, I had to talk of everything that could possibly be said about Mahmud Gami, all the important things about Mahmud Gami. I will say in a few minutes what I have actually discussed in the introduction. So, first of all, Mahmud Gami, as I said, is a very prolific writer. He has written a lot. So it was not possible, and it anyway would not have fitted in that Penguin Classic series if I were to translate everything. So I had to do selections. So this book that is now Yusuf's Fragrance, it has around 2,750 verses. 2,750 verses of Mahmud Gami. And it covers his various genres that he wrote in, mainly Watsun, which is the indigenous Kashmiri form of lyric, and Nazm and Masnavi. These are the three poetic genres that I have tried to cover in this book. And much of the book is on Masnavi, because Masnavis are long narrative poems, which I will come to in a moment. So, introduction, the first, I can say that the book has three parts. The first is the introduction, the second is the translation, and the third is the explanatory notes. In the first one, that is the introduction, which is of 65 pages, as I said, that it had to be very thorough, very critical, very scholarly introduction. So I tried to do that. So the first part is on life of Mahmud Gami. We don't know much about the life of Mahmud Gami, as is true of most other poets of the age, that whatever we know is through anecdotes and whatever someone heard or it got written and that it was taken forward. We don't know much, but we know from his poetry that he lost a son called Sultan Shah Sultan. So he writes an elegy on the death of his son. And we know that he was born and he lived his entire life in South Kashmir called Duru Shahabad. And we also know that he was the older contemporary of Rasul Mir. And Rasul Mir and Mahmud Gami belong to the same place. And one of the anecdotes that is said about Rasul Mir and Mahmud Gami is that he took his inspiration, Rasul Mir took his inspiration from Mahmud Gami, and it is said that once Mahmud Gami, when he bumped into him, he said something in Kashmiri which has two meanings. He said, "Emisi Jan Margihin Kieran." And Jan Margihin Kieran is a proverb in Kashmiri. It means two things. One, that he will die young, so will not live that long. And second, that he is a man of exceptional talent and gift. And it is said that both these predictions came true, because Rasul did not live very long. But he died, but not before he had made a mark, a real mark, as a literary genius of his times. So this is about his life. Very, very little is known about his life. The second part is about the critical reception of Mahmud Gami. What kind of critical reception in Kashmiri tradition has he got? And I realized that people have written very little about him, not much. Shafi Shauk has written some essay about him. Yusuf Ting has written something about him. So on and so forth. There are these short. Even Rahman Rai Sahab has written something about Mahmud Gami. And they call him Chaucer, some call him Rudaki, some call him with some other name, they remember him. The idea is that he was a very pivotal figure in the history of Kashmiri literary tradition, because he introduced many genres into Kashmiri language for the first time, especially genres from Persian, like Mastavi, Nazm, Rubai, and so on and so forth. The third part of the introduction is Gami and the Persian influence. And I spent time with this. Why? Because Gami started writing in Persian. He started his career as a writer in Persian. But he soon realized that perhaps Persian was not a language where he could really excel. So he shifted to Kashmiri. And it was good that he shifted to Kashmiri, because otherwise he would have written a very ordinary kind of verse in Persian. So this is, I think, one of the most interesting parts of this introduction, where I'm talking about Persian influence on Kashmiri poetry and how Kashmiri poetry was enriched by Persian in many ways. So I will just draw your attention to the fact that Kashmiri was a vernacular language at that time. And Persian was a cosmopolitan language which was spoken in the larger Persian-speaking world from Iran to India. And not only was it perhaps the most important language, it was also the language that people wanted to write in order to handle prestige and that reputation and that name. How does a cosmopolitan language relate to or interact with a vernacular language? I tried to discuss this point in this introduction. And my conclusion is that it is something that we call, a symbiosis, where two languages coexist, and a vernacular language learns something from a cosmopolitan language. And the most appropriate description of this process is translation adaptation. Translation hyphen adaptation. What does it mean? It means that a vernacular language, literature of a vernacular language, tries to translate the classics of a cosmopolitan language. That is exactly what happens with Kashmiri when Mahmud Gami is writing. He is the first writer who starts translating Persian Mastavis into Kashmiri. But he does not only translate them. This is not pure translation or mere translation. This is translation adaptation, which means that he's adapting the Persian to the requirements of Kashmiri. He intervenes in many ways. I don't have time to actually talk about the ways in which he makes those interventions. But those interventions are very telling, they're very insightful, and they tell us how a vernacular language, a poet writing in a vernacular language, makes use of the resources that are available to him in a cosmopolitan language. And the end result is that Kashmiri becomes much more enriched by the end than it was before this process starts. Mahmud Gami is not the only person who does it. There are others also. I think the most popular Kashmiri Masnavi written at that time was Bull Rains by Mukbul Shah Kralwari. It is still considered, and I agree with that estimate, that it is artistically the most consummate Masnavi written in Kashmiri. And still untranslated, maybe one of you gets inspired and starts translating it. And that's a wonderful Masnavi of Mukbul Shah Kralwari. That again is a translation of Naqshband's Masnavi. Anyway, and here I take issue with some writers like Abdul Azad's History of Kashmiri Literature, where he gives this impression that Kashmiri was under a baneful influence of Persian for a long time. And for a long time, Kashmiri poets were trying to get rid of this baneful influence of Persian. I try to refute that argument. My argument is that Persian enriched Kashmiri in many ways, and without Persian, Kashmiri would not have been what it is. Just look at how many words, when you use a simple sentence of Kashmiri, how many words have been taken from Persian. Not only did Persian give new genres to Kashmiri like Masnavi, Nazm, Ghazal, Naat, etc., it also gave them a world view, and I'm coming to that world view now. A new worldview that Kashmiri poets did not have at that time to that extent. It was already in Persian poetry, but then how it came from Persian to Kashmiri. So the fourth part of the introduction is about Gami's philosophy of love, which is not confined to Mahmud Gami, because this is something which is very general. It is an idea that informs Kashmiri poetry. All pre-modern Kashmiri poetry is informed by this idea of love, this philosophy of love. What is that philosophy of love? Let me very briefly tell you something about this, because not so much in Shaykh al-Alam, but definitely after Shaykh al-Alam, all those writers who write in Persian first, the Kubrawi writers who write in Persian, like Sarfi, who is the greatest Kubrawi Sufi poet, then Hubbi, and then Akmaluddin Kamil. These are, they are steeped in this worldview, which I am going to explain now. Not only them, even Suharwardis like Baba Dawud Khaki's Qasidas you read, you find that the same idea is there, although not to that extent as in Kubrawi's. What is this philosophy of love? This is, of course, there in Persian poets like Fariduddin Attar, Rumi, Jami, and others. Now, there is an interesting thing about Mahmud Gami's Takhallus. Why did he adopt this name Gami? And there are some people who said that he was mocked by some city dwellers who called him a Gamuk. They said that he can't write poetry, but he is just pretending to be a poet. But he owned this as some kind of as a proud mark of his identity. They say, I am Gami, but I can write. This is said by Abdul Azad, but I don't think there is any evidence of this suggestion. I think because Mahmud Gami always saw himself following the footsteps of Jami. In fact, he calls himself Bushus Koshur Jami. That is why he adopted this word, this Takhallus, Gami. Okay, now what is this worldview that I am talking about? What is this philosophy of existence that I am talking about? Which informs Kashmiri poetry, which is taken from Persian. It is sometimes called Wahdatul Wujud, or oneness of being, or unity of being. And the basic idea in that is that there is just one being in the universe, one reality, and which is that of God. God is the only reality in the universe. Everything else is, it's not Maya. That's what Shankara and other Hindu philosophers would say. It's not Maya because what is other than God is also a manifestation of God's attributes and God's names. But God is the only real thing that is. Everything else is a manifestation, an expression of God's word, God's names, and God's attributes. The real existence belongs to God alone. And this idea is somehow it is ubiquitous in Persian poetry, in Urdu poetry, and in Kashmiri poetry. Now, to sum it up, it means that the divine is in the process of self-witnessing. The universe is like a mirror in which the divine is witnessing itself for himself. And Mahmud Gami talks about it as do other poets. Jami explains this in his preface to Yusuf Zulaikha, that Persian Masnavi that he wrote. In the preface to the prologue to Yusuf Zulaikha, he says that the universe is, could be understood like this. There is a bride in her chamber. A bride in her chamber, she is lost in self-contemplation in a mirror. That is how Jami starts his Masnavi. He says that the divine is busy in self-contemplation in the mirror of the universe. He talks about husn and ishq and how they presuppose each other and all that. So an entire metaphysics follows from this premise. Mahmud Gami's one verse is very famous. Kya vani Adam yat yaksanas panai panas vichnai aab. This sums up his philosophy, which means what can man say to this oneness? He is here to witness himself. We call it, this is divine self-witnessing. This is how we can sum up this metaphysics. Divine self-witnessing. And in one of the passages in Mahmud Gami's Yusuf and Zulaikha, a woman who sees the beauty of Yusuf for the first time, not only Zulaikha, but other women are also bad after Yusuf, because they know what Yusuf's beauty is. हो सब रतीकों से होना खुश पर ज़नाने मिस्र से है ज़ुलेखा खुश की महवे माह का नाम हो गई. As Ghalib would say that this is an exception to the rule that all women hate their rivals in love. Zulaikha loves her rivals because she is vindicated. So I said that this is there in all poetry. I was reminded of a few verses of Ghalib in the morning. Ghalib says, this is there in his Persian poetry, but I'm not quoting his Persian verses. Look at his Urdu verses, where he says that Deher juz jalwaye yakta-ye maashook nahi, hum kahan hote agar husn hota khud been. That is, we would not have been in the first place if beauty were not self-witnessing. And this is just one verse. There are so many other verses. Araish jaman se farik nahi hanooz. This is that very famous ghazal. Kal ke liye na aaj kar khissat sharab mein yusue zan hisa ke kausar ke baab mein. And in this same ghazal you have this verse. Araish jamal se farik nahi hanooz. Peshe nazar hai daim aina naqab mein. Now the beauty of Ghalib's verse is that it is equivocal. It can refer to a female who is carrying a mirror beneath her veil and looking at her beauty, and also the divine who is looking at himself, who is self-witnessing or busy in the activity, in the act of self-witnessing through this universe. So this idea, it permeates Mahmud Gami's poetry. It is there in his wasuns, it is there in his nazms, it is there in his masnavis. And I can quote just one nazm. This will give you an idea of how I have translated and also give you an idea of the main philosophical outlook of Mahmud Gami and also his thematic concerns. There is a nazm called Poper Nama. And incidentally, this is the first poem that I translated of Mahmud Gami. It says, Pompuch mashhur ajab ashike jansoz, dod eki damai yam yutun sham dil afroz, tasut mashawkut kare hil bahanai, ya bav tasun nav natai hav nishanai. Dilkat logui seti, daptho taki wuchut kya, फरियाद करुन जार वनुन बड़ी करुन आ दीवान दु परवान करित बाव कमिस ग्राव सुइजानी यमिक मानी यमिस पान बनित आ तेन तोर दोपुक कुन छुना शम कोई गाशा बीना अछो सहित अद वुचतो तुहति तमाशा छांडान त छांडान द्राय मछो याम शान ड्यूट कमी माय फेरित आय वुचुक पान जालुन क्रूट अफसूस तस युस गरि नीरिथ वति फेरिथ आव राव रो तेम मंद छोवन आशकन हुन नाव गो पान सु परवान तेमी आन जोलन पान त्रवन क्रह तैबा थोवन आशकन अरमान गो पुस्त अपुस सर वुश्तो पीर सुंदई कार नारस तो नूरस पत पानस पान गिरफ्तार पुरसान कोरहस पान को नार जोलुत से स्योद क्याज लोगुत साद कमिक वाद पोलुत से तेमी हतुन वनुन हाल पनुन क्या पनुन गो जांबाज महर मेराज छुये नमाज पनुन खो दरनार डूठुम यार हावन आशकन दीदार यकबार करमस लार सपुन नार में गुलजार अज दूर में युस नूर तसुन वार डूठुम पूल कोर सर एकी जर सदन कोह तूर सूर नारस में मारूम गथ यारस ये फिदा गोस खसमान करित नत जन असमान वसित प्योस पोंपुर बुदूरी छुसई सूर्य बिहित कथ सुई जानी युस छुई नूर खुदा सूर्य सरित कथ शमहस ते उशको दाय गुफ्त ए यार वफादार थजिकार दिल के नार कम्यो यार हुतुई नार युस यार तवई नार मंजी वो दरियावस तस निश छुसई पान पनुन खान हावई कस छुई नहनु अकरब is from Quran nahnu aqrab ilayhi min hablil warid from Quranic verse छुई नहनु अकरब खास गवाह आयत कुरान पर वहुआ माकुम is again from Quran पर वहुआ माकुम सरकर तो यार पनुन पान बाशम दिलान बेहदमा दिल से गसी मोम छुस क्या ओसुस क्या वन पोत गस ये क्या गोम उन दूरी क्या प्रजनावि छु अंधेर दिलस गुल पोंपुर तो शमा जानी गुलुक मान सु बुलबुल छु पान पानस छाय च अमिस जाय वथित गस मोरोज नेबर कनी खबर बोज अंदर अस अंधार रोजुन काय आशिक नीस मुनासिब मतलूब सुंदर टोट गलिब थव छु सु तलिब परवान बाशत व इंजा कसे नीस अफसूस की बाहिम्मत परवान कसे नीस महमूद यारस पत मरून जान से ईदा मम्मात मिनल इश्क फकत मात शहीदा. The last line is an Arabic line. It says that because he died in life. Now listen to this, the translation of this. The moth stayed. The moth has great fame as a lover with a fiery soul. Glimpsing the candle, his heart kindler, he sets himself aflame. One day, some flies pestered him. Tell us your love's secret. Give us a name or a clue at least. Who has stolen your heart? What have your eyes seen? The moth wailed, raised lamentation, and gave a loud shriek. I am a moth driven crazy by love. My anguish defies description. He only knows who suffers love's seething pain. He went on, fetch a burning candle, emitting light and regard it with discerning eyes. The flies searched for a candle frantically and found one burning alone. They pledged their love and fluttered around its flame, but flinched from flinging themselves into its devouring fire. Alas, for those who set out in earnest but leave the journey halfway. Such stragglers only bring shame to the lovers. And then the moth rushed to the flame and burnt himself up without a sob, a cry, or a complaint. He did the lovers proud. Truth and deception fell apart. The sage had proved his point. Fire, light, and lover's soul all fell into unity. Wonder-struck, they asked the moth, what made you embrace the flame? What great promise did you keep jumping foolishly in the fire? So he told the tale of his coming of age. He who feeds on himself learns the inner secret. Inside the flame I saw the beloved busy in self-display. Instantly I ran to him, and my fiery anguish turned into a rose garden's bliss. His radiance I described from afar. Now I understand why the tool was blown away in a single flash. Tears streamed down the candle's face too. They asked, "O faithful friend, what What conflagration rose from your heart to burn down your stately frame? He replied, I invoke this verse as a witness to my state. We are nearer to him than his jugular vein. And don't forget this one, he is with you wherever you are. Sit among candle-like hearts to make your own soft like wax and get the answers to your being's puzzle. How can the blind see in darkness the heart's blooming rose? Only the moth and the candle know love's secret, like the bulbul knows the rose. You are availed to yourself, rise and move away. Do not stay outside, go inside and learn the truth. To live in darkness is unbecoming of a lover. A true seeker keeps his eye on the longed-for goal. Alas, no one has the courage of the moth, and no one nears what he conquers with ease. Mahmud, dying for the friend is the highest bliss. One who dies for love dies the death of a martyr. So this is now a few things about. So I said that I made some selections from Mahmud Gami's Kuliya. So I selected some watsuns, almost all of his nazms, because he has not written many nazms, and 6 of his masnavis, major masnavis. The first masnavi that I have translated is Khusro Shirin. Khusro Shirin is actually written in Persian by Nizami Ganjvi, very famous poet of classical Persian. And Khusro Shirin is the only masnavi of Mahmud Gami which is not a Sufi masnavi, which is not a mystical masnavi. Because Nizami himself calls it Havasnama, a poem of desire. And Gami actually takes it from, of course he intervenes here and there and reduces the size of the poem, but this is the only masnavi which is not really mystical in that sense. The second masnavi that I have translated is Yusuf's and Zulaikha. Now Yusuf and Zulaikha are very well-known figures in history of literature. They are everywhere, in Kashmiri literature, in Urdu literature, in Persian literature. By the way, what is the reason of the title of the book, Yusuf's Fragrance? Because this Yusuf's Fragrance plays a very important part in the story. If you have read the Quran, what does Yaqub say when the caravan leaves Egypt for Canaan? Inni la ajidu riha Yusuf lawla an tufannidu. That is, I can smell the fragrance of Yusuf if you don't take me to be, befuddled and they say that innaka lafi dhalalikal qadim. It seems that dotage has overtaken you and you are saying things which are nonsensical. But he had smelled the fragrance of Yusuf while staying in Canaan. And then when Yusuf had said that izhabu bi kamisi hadha fa'alquhu ala wajhi abi yartaddu basira, take this shirt of mine and rub it against the eyes of my father, his eyesight will return. That is exactly what happened when that shirt was taken. So it was the fragrance of Yusuf and his shirt that is the reason behind this title of the book. So the second masnavi is Yusuf Zulaikha, and Yusuf Zulaikha is, according to Shafi Shawq, he writes at one place that Yusuf Zulaikha was the most popular masnavi in Kashmir for around 200 years. Most popular masnavi in Kashmir, which beat even Maqbul Shah Kralwari's Bull Race. And I have not seen, but I am sure that older people, if there are any old people here, when they used to, especially in rural areas, they say that they used to listen to the recitation of these poems in the evenings, and they used to enjoy it a lot. So the story is, of course, taken from the Quran. The base is in the Quran, but now we know that how poets work on those themes and how they actually invest these stories with new meanings. Now this is something interesting because poets do make use of what you call poetic license. All great poets have done this. And Attar does it, Rumi does it. This is one example that Yusuf Zulaikha's story in the Quran is not presented as a love story. Its main purpose is to show that Yusuf stood all temptation. He withstood all temptation, and he emerged victorious. He was because God was with him, so he did not fall prey to the schemes of women. He said, "Rabbi sijnu ahabbu ilayya mimma yad'unani ilayhi, wa illam tasrif anni kaydahunna akun min al-jahilin." That if you do not turn them away from me, I might also fall, and I might also get corrupted. And he said, "Rabbi sijnu ahabbu ilayya mimma yad'unani ilayhi." Going to prison is dearer to me than doing what they are asking me to do. So he languished in prison for many years, and finally God's scheme, it prevailed. He was released from the prison, and then he rose to be the minister of the state and all that. That happens later on. So the main idea in the Quranic story is the chastity of Yusuf, the purity of Yusuf, and God's scheme. Wallahu ghalibun ala amrihi walakinna akthara an-nasi la ya'lamun. God is in full command of what he has to do, but most people do not know. And how it starts with Yusuf having a dream in which he sees those 11 stars, the sun and the moon prostrating before him. That is in the beginning of the surah, when he says, "Ya abati inni ra'aytu ahada ashara kawkaban wash-shamsa wal-qamara ra'aytuhum li sajidin." I saw the sun, the moon and the 11 stars prostrating before him. And the father could understand, he said that this is a very great dream. La taqsus ru'yaka ala ikhwatik, but don't say this to your brothers, because they will scheme against you. Somehow the brothers came to know, and all that happened. He became a victim of their conspiracy, but God had some other plans. So at the end, when he calls his brothers and his parents to Misr, to Egypt, where he is now de facto ruler of Egypt, the Quran says that they bowed before him, because that was the custom of that time. Even Yaqub bows before his son, even his mother bows before him, and his brothers before him. And he says, "Haza ta'biru ruya." This is the Haza ta'biru ruya. This is the interpretation of that dream that I had, which I saw as a boy. Anyway, so the story is of the love story, and I told you how Jami puts it in a new context, and how it is actually the relationship between Husn and Ishq, and how it fits into that metaphysical scheme. About poetic license, there is another example in Mahmud Gami, which is actually taken from Rumi. Rumi also uses many figures, even prophets of God. People who are too literal-minded would object to this, that how can a poet talk about a prophet and say things which have not actually happened, or about which we don't have any proofs. But Rumi's Masnavis and Attar's Masnavis are full of such stories. One such story is about a shepherd. One of the Masnavis that I have translated is called Pahil Naam. Pahil Naam is shepherd's tale. What is that story about? The story is about a shepherd who is moving on, he is walking his way, mast hota hai, wo chal raha hota hai, and he's singing aloud. And exactly at that time, Musa, who's a prophet of God, is going to meet God at Tur. And he overhears what he's saying, what the shepherd is saying. The shepherd is saying that, "Oh God, I have been looking for you so long, but I have not found you. But could you please come to my home one day, so that I act as your host? I make you comfortable, I wash your feet, I wash your dirt, I give you food to eat, I milk my cow, milk my goat, make good delicious sweets from it, feed you with my own hand, and press your arms, and when Hazrat Musa hears this, he is shocked. So he grabs this shepherd and says that, what are you saying? Your talk is so terrible that it can bring down heavens on the earth. What are you saying? You make repentance immediately, because God is above all these things. And then he goes to meet God. And when he goes to meet God, God refuses to talk to him. Says that, what's wrong? He said that, Tu baraye fasl mi yawmdi, nay baraye, tu baraye wasl mi yawmdi, nay baraye fasl mi yawmdi. I have sent you to connect people to me, not to turn them away from me. Oh, I like so much what that shepherd said about me. You go and you apologize. So Musa is made to go and to meet that shepherd, and then all that happens. And Mahmud Gami uses this in his Masnavi Pahalnama, which is again taken from Rumi's Masnavi. I'm just talking about the poetic license that they make use of in order to drive home a moral lesson, a religious lesson. So after this Yusuf Zulaikha, there is Laila Majnoon. I won't talk much about this because the story is well known. Again, it is put in that it is given a very mystical, a very Sufi bent by Mahmud Gami. Then there is another interesting story which is called Sheikh Sanan. Sheikh Sanan, Mahmud Gami has taken Sheikh Sanan from Faridin Attar's Mantiqut Tayyib. And this is a very interesting story of a Muslim servant falling miserably in love with a Christian girl. But it is a mystical work, it's a mystical poem, it's a Sufi poem. Now what is the story about? The story is about, very famous Masnavi of Attar is Mantiqut Tayyib, the speech of the birds. It is a Sufi allegory which actually stands for the journey of the soul, how the soul has to cross many valleys in order to reach somewhere, and all that. But in that Masnavi there are dozens of stories, and one of the stories is of Sheikh Sanan. Sheikh Sanan is a very, very well-known Muslim servant, and he's respected throughout Islamic lands. He has thousands of disciples. One day he has a dream. In that dream he sees that he's bowing before an idol in Rome. And then he tells his disciples that I have to interpret this dream. What does it mean? Let us go to Rome. And he goes to Rome. Okay. I will just say this and then we will complete. He goes to Rome, and there, when he is walking some place, he sees a Christian girl, and he instantly falls in love with her. And he is simply outwitted, and he doesn't know what has happened to him. In any case, he goes, he begs, he pleads, she refuses. But she says that, okay, in one case, I can accept you. You will leave Islam, you will burn the Quran, and you will tend my swine, my pigs, for 1 year. If you are ready to do this, then I am ready to be yours. This man is so overwhelmed with the passion of love, he says, I will accept everything. So he gives up his allegiance to faith, he burns the scripture, and he starts tending her swine. But then many things happen in the story, in the course of the story. Ultimately what happens is that in the end, something mysterious, some miraculous thing happens, and he realizes what has happened. In the Masnavi, there is that prophet comes to one of his disciples in one of his disciples' dreams and says that don't think that this ordeal that he had to go through, it was accidental, it was part of the plan. Because we wanted to make him go through that ordeal of love so that he attains a higher spiritual state. And that is what happens at the end, that he realizes that Ishq Majazi for him has been a way through which he could realize Ishq Hakiki. So the poem is actually about, the Masnavi is about the relation between Ishq Majazi and Ishq Hakiki. And it has a very dramatic end, it has a very beautiful song that is not there in Attar, but that is in Mahmud Gami. A very wonderfully written, beautifully written song. Anyway, I don't have time to speak more about the book, The book is there outside also, some copies, and it's easily available on Amazon. I think that is it now. I will be happy to take your questions and your observations. Thank you.